I woke up on New Year's Day, 2013, on the floor of a prison cell. Half naked, bruised, and incredibly confused. At just 19 years old, I'd been spiraling through some of the darkest moments of my life, and had not long before tried to commit suicide. Fast forward 4 months, and I'm on the streets of Leeds handing out all of my possessions and my money to homeless people, utterly convinced that I am the next Messiah. Now, as you might expect, I was not long after put on a psychiatric ward. I was pumped with mood stabilizers and antipsychotic drugs, and I was labeled with what the Western medical model calls bipolar disorder. Now, I never really resonated with the label bipolar, but what I've come to realize is that I was indeed experiencing two spectrums, two poles of what I believed to be this idea that I was separate. Separate in feeling somehow less than or inferior to the people around me, and then separate in feeling somehow superior, special in some way. And I came to believe somehow that separation may just be at the root of many of our issues in society. They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm a believer that it takes a village for an adult to thrive at any chapter of life. And in modern society, that village is so often missing. But how do we rebuild it? How do we reintegrate it? Well, the answer to that question is complicated and multifaceted, but I do believe that festivals can be a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. They can be blueprints for belonging, catalysts for change. And that realization, that belief, has led my life's work today. Alongside a beautiful and diverse team, we host a 10,000-person, alcohol-free, non-profit festival that's raised over £100,000 for various charities and communities around the world to date. And you'll see many photos from the festival. I have deeply witnessed on countless occasions the transformation that this has on people's lives, that festivals directly have on people's lives. They helped me when I was suffering so deeply. Because my story isn't unique. So many of us feel utterly disconnected in the most technologically connected era of human history. And it's not surprising. We live in a capitalist society of comparison and competition. So many of us feeling somehow less than, isolated, moving into depression and even suicide. I was shocked to hear that every 40 seconds someone somewhere takes their own life. That is more than wars, natural disasters, and homicides combined. And when we feel somehow better than the people around us, narcissism emerges. Look at politics and war, the duopoly of us versus them, of left versus right, creating the conditions for things like dictatorships to emerge. Turns out that almost 40% of the entire planet live under authoritarian rule in this moment. And when we feel separate from the earth, the very earth that sustains us, that gives us life, we extract, we exploit, we turn the planet into products, we turn people into services. We kill life itself. Turns out we've wiped out 70% of wildlife populations in just over 50 years. But what does all of this tell us? Actually, something quite beautiful. That we are wired for togetherness. That we need more places of connection to be together in order to really thrive. To plant the seeds of cultural change that we so deeply and dearly need. I'd love to share a quote that outlines this beautifully from James Gustav Speth. He says, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And I thought that 30 years of good science could resolve this. But what I've come to realize is that the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists do not know how to do that." And as Gustav says, science alone is not going to lead us to where we need to get to. So rather than just splurting off facts and figures, I've taken a bit more of a philosophical approach to understanding how festivals can bring about some of that transformation that we so dearly need. Now, for those of you that have never been to festivals, don't worry, this talk is for you too. It's not really about festivals, actually. I'm kind of using them as a lens, as a living experiment to observe and understand something much deeper. What it means to be human together. Some of you may be thinking of a muddy field, a giant stage with a big band, long queues with overpriced beer, and a giant corporation at the top extracting every penny out of our creativity to pay off shareholders. That's not what I mean either. I'm kind of alluding to this independent, heart-led, often labeled as transformational festival, where art, music, culture, ceremony, ritual, talks and workshops all come together to create something so much more than just entertainment. Rooted in a very deep and clear intention that are incredibly diverse in their nature, but all share a common thread. To transform us as people in attendance, but to transform something collectively. To try and make the world a better place. And that may sound a little bit lofty and idealistic. So I'd love to share a story of someone's first festival experience. It was just over a decade ago, I went to Burning Man, and my friend got a taxi there. He ordered an Uber, and that Uber driver was just 19 years old and had never heard of Burning Man before. And by the time he got there, he was utterly convinced that he had to attend. So my friend gave him his ticket and hid in the boot. They got into Burning Man. They lost each other immediately. Bearing in mind this is in the desert, you have to take absolutely everything, even your own water. And my friend had nothing for an entire week. I met him on the last day in a tiger onesie that he had been given on day one. And he said that he has never believed more in the human race, the kindness and the generosity of people. And we met the taxi driver. 8 hours later than we'd planned, he turned up with a car full of plastic. Said that he had completely shifted the way that he sees the world. And when we asked about the plastic, he said, I collected every single piece that I could find since I'd left Burning Man. I was so inspired by the Leave No Trace policy that I'm going to return next year and make this into a giant art sculpture to represent the destruction of consumer capitalism. See, festivals can be a catalyst, they can be a spark. They can shift your worldview in a weekend, where the rules are different, where job titles somehow fall away, where strangers somehow become family, where anything feels possible. One study was done that showed that 90% of people that attend festivals find it so beautiful because of the deep sense of freedom that they feel. Festivals give us a glimpse of a healthier world so we can carry some of that home and emanate it out into our communities, into our streets, into our workplaces. And they're not new. Festivals are as old as humanity itself. There's evidence that we've been gathering in places like Stonehenge for thousands of years. Celebrations often taking place on life's great thresholds. Cycles of the sun and the moon, the turning of the seasons, individual rites of passage for those in community. Worth mentioning that ticketed transformational festivals are not accessible to everyone. They're somewhat privileged, but some form of festival culture often is accessible. It's not reserved for the privileged. There are places across the entire globe that have held festival culture for generations, from Holi in India to Carnival in Brazil to Timkat in Ethiopia. They are the bedrock of our creative culture. They have kept our myths alive. They have been the birthplace of song and story, of poetry and prayer, of dance and devotion. Living laboratories to help us to evolve our relationship to life. But how can modern festivals continue this beautiful legacy? And what is it that makes transformational festivals such fertile soil for change? I've distilled my views on this into 3 overlapping and interconnected, macro pillars that actually respond to the 3 pillars of separation I spoke to earlier. The first one is blueprints for belonging. Studies show that festivals, and this is across many studies, I think 4 or 5 that I pulled out, that people feel a deeper sense of belonging at a festival. They feel a deeper sense of trust for their community. They feel happier. And there's evidence that well-being increases, not just at the festival, but continues to when they leave. Festivals are living, breathing social experiments in community living, where we get to feel belonging and not just talk about it. Co-created spaces where the line between participant and performer dissolves, and we're all responsible for creating a shared culture across that weekend. There's an openness to connect that we just don't get in day-to-day life. I myself have vivid memories of dancing with people I'd never met for hours, crying on the shoulder of a stranger and making best friends with someone in the queue for the toilet that I'm still best friends with to this day. They remind us that connection is really what we seek as humans. Take the word community, for example, broken down in Latin. Com means together, unity means as one. At festivals, we are invited to come together as one, to remind ourselves that we're not isolated beings. We are unique notes in a shared, greater symphony. These are healthy ecosystems, and healthy ecosystems need diversity to thrive, and that is done through bursary tickets, through accessible camping and support, right the way down to spaces run by and for underrepresented groups, from women to LGBTQIA to BIPOC. Radical inclusivity that celebrates everyone. I see festivals in some way as practice grounds for a healthier society that I personally long to be a part of. The second pillar is expanding beyond the self. Transformational festivals give us opportunities to engage in collective activities that take us beyond just self-awareness and help us to recognize that we are part of something bigger. Whether it's repetitive rhythms of electronic dance music or drumming, collective singing or mantra, choreographed dance or collective ceremonies. All of these are proven to induce trance-like states that science shows boosts our levels of empathy, reduces stress, dissolves the boundary of self, and shifts the way that we perceive time. The ancient Greeks had 2 beautiful, rather philosophical views on time. The first one is kairos. Kairos is chronological, sequential time. We wake, we work, we sleep, the monotony of life with the deadlines and schedules. And kairos is this time beyond time, where something beautiful breaks through, where time seems to somehow move differently. And behind this very fire behind me, I have a beautiful memory of kairos, singing to Nessie Gomez not long after the lockdowns had lifted, and we repeated the lyrics, "We are all related," on repeat for what felt like hours, but was almost certainly just a couple of minutes. And I've never felt more unified and connected, as if my separate sense of self just dissolved into a collective soup of loving awareness somehow. Festivals are portals into kairos. As the old proverb goes, measure life not in the amount of breaths you took, but the amount of times that your breath was taken away. The final pillar is catalysts for change. Take Woodstock, 1969. 500,000 people gathered for what they called 3 days of music and peace. And while Woodstock didn't directly bring an end to the Vietnam War, it became a symbol of peace and protest. It shifted the public view that eventually supported leaders to withdraw entirely. But the change isn't always political. Festivals shift us on a personal level more than anything. There are talks and workshops questioning the way that we're living, offering bold visions for the future, supporting people to heal. From learning to grow your own food, to healing and moving through grief and trauma, right the way through to reimagining entire educational systems. Festivals have a real-world impact. I know of various communities across the UK, and I'm sure there's many more beyond, that have birthed permanent residential co-living communities trying to live in a better way. There are earth-honoring traditions and ceremonies that support us to come back to the understanding that we are in fact nature itself and we are not separate from it. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. There's an opportunity to move away from just mindless extraction into more care and reciprocity. And festivals have a footprint, they're not perfect. But the way that they address them can plant seeds for change in individuals, from no single-use plastic to cycling to the festival to reduce your carbon footprint, right the way through to making donations and raising awareness of projects that so deeply and dearly need it, in the same way that Glastonbury gave Greenpeace and Oxfam a huge platform. One festival is certainly not the answer, but one festival can be a catalyst for change in one individual. And the ripples that one individual makes can go on to make meaningful waves in the world. You see, these pillars really helped 19-year-old me in the depths of my suffering, supported me to put my energy into the places that festivals showed me mattered, from isolation to community, from competition to collaboration, from extraction to regeneration, from me to we. Perhaps festivals can play a small part in that spiritual and cultural transformation that James Gustav Speth spoke so beautifully of earlier. Not to escape this world, but as a reminder of what might be possible. As gateways back into the village, gateways back into our hearts. To remember that we are all connected. Festivals have always held us. But perhaps now they can guide us back to what we have forgotten. How to celebrate this one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver would say. And perhaps if we can remember that, and we can live it, not just in the fields, but each and every day, then perhaps life itself can become the greatest festival of all. Thank you.